All right, hello everybody. Welcome to the show. Today, as you could have guessed, we're talking about Wolverine. New issue, new volume came out today. It's the first solo Wolverine title with Logan in the role for I think 5+ years, maybe 6 years now. So it's kind of crazy to think that they went that long at Marvel without like a proper solo Wolverine title. But he's back. Remember some spoilers for the new issue, talk about what might be coming up in this title in the coming months, and then also do some Wolverine history. Talk about the publishing history of the character, like how many previous solo titles and volumes did he have, and even with the movies, it was interesting. I went back and watched, or went back and looked at who had almost been cast as Wolverine over the years. So we'll talk about that a bit too. And as people join in, if you join the chat, feel free to jump in there, ask any questions, and I'll respond to that as we go. And also, you may have noticed what I'm doing. I'm drawing a Wolverine head sketch here, actually inking it. Already did the pencils both for this head and this figure based off an old Jim Lee drawing. Way back in the day, early 90s Jim Lee. To me, that he's been at DC for decades now as a publisher, working at DC, and Marvel, can't get any new X-Men art out of them. So what they do is they reuse the existing art. Will Jim Lee ever, in time, come back to X-Men? It is hard to say. It'd be nice if he did, but I think he's pretty much locked down at DC for a while now, if not forever. But anyway, back to this issue of Wolverine. This is Wolverine, I think, depending on how you count it, you could say this is either Wolverine Volume 6 or Wolverine Volume 5. And you're going to say it's 6 if you count the original miniseries by Claremont, Frank Miller, and inker Joe Rubinstein. And you're going to say this is Volume 5 if you just count the regular series. So either way. And also you might be wondering, I've got kind of, I always want to know, what is the legacy numbering for the title we're talking about? Like if we added up all the issues of every volume, how many Wolverines will we get? And by my count, we got to, this is either 343 or 345, depending on how you count it, but I'll come back to that and talk about that in a bit. But first, let's talk about this story. I was actually, I will say, pleasantly surprised. I didn't know going into this new volume of Wolverine really what to expect. I guess I did know what to expect in terms of art. I knew the art was going to be incredible. Like I've already talked about how Jim Lee is one of the best X-Men artists and one of the best Wolverine artists, but if I had to pick a singular best Wolverine artist, it would be Adam Kubert. And I always resist the urge. It's Kubert, Kubert, and that's how I've heard people say his name, his father's name, Joe Kubert, the Kubert School. It's named after Joe. But I always want to say, like, is this French? Should I be saying Kubert? I don't know. It seems like that's a possibility. Like if you go back, several generations, it might have been the Kuberts became the Kuberts. But I can't say that for sure. I will say it reminds me a bit too of the actress for Supergirl. She pronounces her name Melissa Benoist, but it's absolutely, the French for that would be like Benoit or something along those lines. Something closer to that anyway. But anyway, the Kuberts, it's a very talented family of artists. Like I already mentioned, Joe, legendary Sergeant Rock artist from decades ago, sadly has passed away, but has a school named after him, the Kubert School, where a lot of up-and-coming artists, comic book artists, go to learn more, to become even better. And both of his sons, Adam and Andy, are graduates of that program. Only makes sense. And they started late 80s, early 90s, I think, drawing comics professionally for Marvel and DC. One of the early things they did that really made a splash was a crossover between Batman and the Predator. We got some comments in here. Monkey C is this your favorite Wolverine costume? Monkey C, I'm glad you asked. Absolutely, yes. You can't tell yet because I haven't put the colors down, but this is the gold or yellow, the goldish yellow and brown costume that was, I think, originally designed by John Byrne in the late 70s or early 80s, replacing, and there's a funny story that goes along with that. When Jim Lee came onto the title, pretty soon into his run, within a year or so, he had put Wolverine back into the original costume. And he had mentioned that to John Byrne, who was previously the artist on X-Men, but now was doing scripting, helping Jim Lee write the script for new issues of X-Men. And he was saying, John, you would be so proud of me. I got Wolverine back in the original costume, and I got rid of that replacement costume. Because, I think he was thinking, John Byrne's a bit of a purist. He wants, like, the original versions of characters. And John, I think, said to him, I wasn't there, but I read this somewhere. He said to him, Jim, I designed the brown and gold costume. Not sure it bothered him too much. I agree, Monkey See, it is hilarious. I don't know if that actually bothered him, but it is sort of a funny thing. Like, you got to know your history. So you got to know who you're talking to, honestly. If you're making claims about saving or improving a character, for example, make sure you're not talking about improving a character by removing a costume and saying it to the person that designed that costume. I wish I could remember where I had read that, but I think if you Google that, if you Google like Jim Lee, John Byrne, Wolverine costume discussion or argument, I don't know. It might come up, maybe. Or it's possible. It's apocryphal. It's possible, in keeping in line with the tradition of Wolverine, it's possible that it is an implanted memory that they gave me in the Weapon X program, and I can't be sure what is the truth. But back a bit to, we were talking about the artist. And like I was saying, Adam and Andy started really early with like a Batman versus Predator crossover for Dark Horse. Some great art on that. And then moved over pretty quickly after that to the X Office at Marvel, where they started drawing a lot of X-Men books. After Jim Lee left to do, to create Wildstorm and help co-found Image Comics and create Wildcats, he left X-Men, of course. So they needed a new artist, and they had Art T. Bear immediately after Jim Lee. And then pretty soon after that, Andy Kubert comes on. And then over on Wolverine, after Mark Silvestri left, again, another artist that left to go to Image, and he created Cyberforce. There was a run of artists, including Mark Texeira. I'm not sure exactly how I said it. Texeria? I don't know. Tex. We call him Tex. So he did some Wolverine issues after Silvestri left, and then there was some issues by Dwayne Turner and Jim Fern. And then for the big anniversary issue, number 75 of the first volume, Adam Kubert comes on. He comes on like a flash of lightning out of the blue, and this guy is just incredible. It's amazing the work he's doing right off the bat on Wolverine. And, I say he's my favorite Wolverine artist ever. I just love the life and the character that he brings to this character of Wolverine. It just always seems appropriate. And again, like, just the key word for me is lively. It always seems like a character in motion when Adam is drawing him. And sadly, he hasn't drawn, if we say there's been like 300 plus solo Wolverine issues over the years, sadly, he's only done a couple of dozen of those. There have been other great artists besides Adam, of course, like even pretty quickly after he left, Lionel Francis Yu, another relatively new artist at the time, came on Wolverine Volume 1 around 113 or 114 and was just like a revelation at that point. It was insane how good he was and how it seemed like he just came from nowhere. But he had been drawing comics, I think, in the Philippines for a while and was working with Will Portacio, another guy who had left Marvel to go to Image. But Lionel Francis Yu started at Marvel, I believe, with Wolverine, did a decent run on that character. And then there was some other artists who were great too. But again, I will just say, bottom line, Adam Kubert, best Wolverine artist. And if you can get any of those issues he drew, it wasn't every single one, but roughly his first run on the title was issue 75 to, I think, issue 102. And he left pretty soon after, almost immediately after, they had introduced this plot point where, if you remember in Wolverine 75, Magneto takes all of the adamantium, all of the metal off of Wolverine's skeleton and extracts it through his pores, which must be very painful. But, Wolverine's got the healing factor, so he'll be okay. But, so he's got bone claws for that whole Adam Kubert run, essentially. And by the time issue 100 rolls along, they decide to introduce this extra plot point where not only does he have bone claws, but also apparently the adamantium, in theory, was preventing Wolverine from entering a second mutation. So this was like the noseless Wolverine. I don't know if you remember this design for the character. It wasn't very popular, and they pumped the brakes on that almost immediately. I think within 7 or 8 issues, they were already like, forget we said anything. It's normal Wolverine. We're going back to the best there is at what he does and the way that people love him. They love him in this original design. They don't want Wolverine looking like a weird sort of orc without a nose who's becoming more beast than man. So they got rid of that quick. And then, unfortunately, like I said, Adam was already gone from the title and Lionel Francis Yu was on. But he was doing great work. And for whatever reason, like Wolverine's always been a high-selling character. The solo series, I think, could have run pretty solidly from whenever it originally started, like 1989, until currently, until the current year, 2020. And if they had, we probably would be, if they had done once a month or so, we'd probably be over issue 400 or so now. But for whatever reason, they rebooted the title a couple times. And one of those times was, like after issue 189 of the first volume, they, with the same creative team, no less, I think it was like Derek Robertson was drawing it, and Asad Ribic was doing covers. I forget who was writing it at the time. It might have been Jason Aaron, but he might have come along a little later. But they stopped at 189 and then did just new issue 1 the next month. So in your head, you could treat it as 190. Nothing's really changed. But they did that volume for about 74 issues. And then to make things as confusing as possible, at some point in there was also an issue 900. So it was like a special, strange anniversary decision. They just jumped to 900. Don't know why that was the case. So they got 74 issues plus issue 900. Then they started volume 3 with issue 1 again. Went 20 issues there. And then then they did the legacy numbering. And they said, okay, if we add everything up, we're now officially at 300. But you're like, whoa, these numbers don't work. And the reason that is because ultimately they were going from, they added volume 1, 189, volume 2, 74, and then what they count as part of Volume 2 was another series called Wolverine Weapon X. And that ran for 16 issues. So if you add that all together, then they got to 300. Monkey C is asking in the chat, do you think Hugh Jackman was a good choice to play Wolverine? In retrospect, I think yes. At the time, well, we didn't really know who Hugh Jackman was. There's that Saturday Night Live sketch that's now a little more famous of Hugh Jackman, the most masculine and the most feminine man in the world. And it would seem strange to think like, oh, we're going to take someone who can sing on Broadway and cast him as this berserker rage mutant. But we didn't know that at the time. We didn't know the range of Hugh Jackman's talents. So as an unknown, I think we were all good with it. I think the biggest complaint at the time in 2000 was people were saying, wait a second, this guy's way too tall to be Wolverine. Because Wolverine's supposed to be short. He's like, canonically, if you look at like the back of his trading card information, like his rookie Marvel trading card, it says Wolverine like 5'2", and Hugh Jackman is not. He's way taller than 5'2". So that I think was the biggest criticism at the time. But there were other people in the running to play Wolverine because they were thinking about doing an X-Men movie as far back as like 1989. With Carolco, the company that made a lot of like Van Damme films and, like the action movies of the day. And also I think possibly Superman 4, I want to say. I could be wrong about that. But they did a lot of schlock, we'll say, back in the 80s. And when they were originally thinking about doing the X-Men movie, one of the actors they were seriously considering was Bob Hoskins, who was, you may remember, Eddie Valiant in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and Mario in the Super Mario Brothers movie, or Mario, whatever you like. And so it's funny, even at the time, to think, he's definitely short enough for the part. Could he play the character? I don't know. He's short, he's hairy, seems like a good fit on the surface. Could he play the role? He's a great actor. I would say possibly, again, sadly, another person who has since passed away. So we don't know for sure if Bob Hoskins would have been a good fit. And then throughout the 90s, as they were trying to make this X-Men movie work, they were considering all these other options too. And my favorite of everyone they thought about as an actor potentially to play Wolverine was Gary Sinise, Lieutenant Dan from Forrest Gump, as well as he starred and directed in Of Mice and Men adaptation. He was in Stephen King's The Stand, the TV miniseries, and some other good things too. I mean, he hasn't been in a lot of things I've seen recently or even in a decade or so. But at the time, thinking back to 98, 99, 2000, I think Gary Sinise would have been an awesome choice for Wolverine, and really good at playing, the foil to Cyclops and basically being upset and angry at Cyclops all the time. Because, just think about sort of the way he treated Tom Hanks as Forrest Gump when he was playing Lieutenant Dan. You can kind of see, I think this would be like a good comparison to how he might have approached the Wolverine role. But of course, these weren't the only guys. They considered so many people, so many A-list actors in Hollywood were up for consideration for Wolverine. Some of them were offered and were never really going to do it. They were just like, it was kind of a Hail Mary toss to like get some of these actors to sign on. And they did not. So some of those were like Mel Gibson was considered, Keanu Reeves was considered, and Keanu even said like he was a fan of the comics growing up, but it's different. I think he said it's different when you're a kid. You think like, oh, I want to do this. I want to play this character. I want to grow up and play this character. And then when you're an adult, you start to second guess yourself a little bit. And I think he second guessed himself for taking on that role specifically. But he probably would have been good. But of course, he's gone to great things otherwise. He's still very much in the public consciousness. So you can't say that missing out on Wolverine really hurt Keanu's career. Monkey C is asking in the chat, who do you think they will cast as Wolverine now that Hugh is getting older? Another good question. I couldn't say for sure. I think it's the best idea to, again, like they did for casting Hugh, essentially go with an unknown. Go with someone, certainly a little younger. It's funny because Wolverine is like centuries old in continuity, like as a character. Like if you remember the opening montage from Wolverine, the X-Men Origins movie, there's like Wolverine in all these wars for like the past 100 years as an adult. So he's just that old. He's had that many experiences. But I think, even keeping that in mind, that he's supposed to be older, cast a younger, unknown person that in theory could play the role for a decade or more, which it happens faster than you think. It really is crazy to think. I mean, Hugh Jackman made the most of it. He was Wolverine in like 7, 8, maybe even 9 movies if you count all the cameos for things like First Class and X-Men Apocalypse. He had a good run with the character, but even making the most of it, it's like tears and rain. It's after you're gone, it's gone. Well, at least we have the films to remember his performance by, and he's not dead. Let me remind everyone of that. So the other couple actors that I mentioned, Mel Gibson was considered, Russell Crowe was considered, Van Damme was even considered. I think that was a lot earlier. Van Damme was a possibility, I think, back when it was at Carolco, who, like I mentioned, was a company that I believe produced a lot of those Van Damme flicks of the day. Although I forget specifically which ones, and I don't want to say and, be incorrect. But I imagine some of those Carolcos were Van Damme, or some of those Van Dammes were Carolco. Monkey C, you got one more good suggestion in the chat, I see. You're saying maybe they'll just deep fake Hugh into a younger person. And you know what? I'd like to see him try. That'd be funny. That'd be funny if they did like, say like the framing device. Like they have a movie of like, it's like Wonder Woman. Wolverine pulls out an old photograph and he's like remembering back during the war. And so then they go back and they de-age him for that sequence. That would be interesting. That would be fun. So and a couple more bits on the casting, and then I swear I'm going to talk about this new issue of Wolverine that came out today. I know you're all in suspense for that. But in terms of the casting, the guy who really missed the boat, I would say, is actor Doug Ray Scott, who is a Scottish actor that was going to be Wolverine. He was cast as Wolverine. They had made the decision. They were going to start filming, and it seemed like he was going to have great success because he was also in Mission Impossible 2 around the same time. But the filming for Mission Impossible 2 went on for so long that he had to drop out of the role, and that's when they got Hugh Jackman. So the villain from Mission Impossible 2 might have also been Wolverine. but unfortunately they lost him. And it's, kind of tragic probably from his point of view. The funny thing to me, or the irony there, or the coincidence there, is that, Mission Impossible, for whatever reason, you look at that example, and then you could also look at the example from Mission Impossible Fallout, the 6th movie, where they refused to let Henry Cavill shave his mustache that he had for that role to do reshoots for Justice League. So the scheduling issues on Mission Impossible, it's been a couple times now where they have kind of screwed over other big tentpole productions that other studios are trying to do by holding on to actors that had committed to these other roles. Now, whether that's, a terrible accident that happened twice in 2 decades, or whether it's by design, it's, kind of unfortunate sometimes for the audience. I think in terms of the Wolverine example, it was okay for the audience. We got a great Wolverine. But Justice League it wasn't outright ruined by having to CGI out a mustache, but it wasn't improved. We'll say that. So those are all the people that were considered to be Wolverine. Let's go back and talk about the comics for a bit. So this new issue of Wolverine, I've already given you quite a bit of setup for why I love this artist, Adam Kubert. That was why I was going to pick up this issue no matter what, no matter who was writing it. But who is writing it is Benjamin Percy, who's been writing X-Force, this current volume of X-Force. And he's been doing pretty good over there. There's nothing quite yet in that run on the title that is making me stand up and take notice of Ben, or if he prefers Benjamin, as an author on his own. Like, I'm not sure I would seek out his material if he left the X office, but at this point it's totally good. And he's been working with some amazing artists, and in this case, one of the best there is at what he does, Adam Kubert. So that is really helping. But again, it's not even so much that Adam is just elevating the material, because it's more than good. Like, I'll point out a couple things in this issue that I really liked in terms of character, or that at least made me think. Like, I wonder, it's like one of those things I want to ask Chris Claremont about. And I'll tell you the example of this is in this issue, Wolverine and one of his former child sidekicks, Catherine Pryde, also known as Shadowcat, are sharing a drink. She's old enough now. She can have some whiskey. So they're having whiskey, and Kitty Pryde does this interesting thing where, her power is she can phase through objects, like just put her hand through a wall or a floor or whatever. And she just phases through the shot glass of whiskey, but then I guess phases the whiskey into her bloodstream in her hand. So that's like how she drinks the whiskey, and she presents it as a party trick. And it's like one of those things. Again, I want to ask Chris Claremont, hey, is that how her powers work? Like, I want to ask the guy who's in charge, who was a co-creator for the character. Monkey C is saying in the chat, oh, you said that already. They'll deep fake him in as a younger person. Already said that. Yeah, that's true. But I wonder, it's like, is that how her powers work? Can she just phase alcohol into her hand by slamming it down like that? So I thought that was definitely, well, from my point of view, the most interesting character bit. And then also in terms of character, there's a new character that's introduced in this issue that I am thinking, I'm like, okay, this has got to be a reference to an actor. And if you've read the issue, you absolutely know who I'm talking about. And that is, they've got like a CIA special agent. And I think he's a new character. I'm not sure we've seen him before. And his name is Agent Bannister. But his first name is Jeff. And he looks just like Jeff Bridges. And he even talks like him. He says man a lot, and I can hear the voice in my head. And this issue is like, we got to do something about this, man. It's not a perfect impression, but you get where I'm going here. So I'm thinking like there is, and Adam's drawing him like wearing like sandals and cargo shorts and a Hawaiian t-shirt. He's got the look. He's got the sort of Jeff Bridges as the dude, as the Big Lebowski look. But the name Bannister, the name Jeff is like Jeff Bridges, right? But the name Bannister, where is this coming from? And the only thing I could see is like, if you go way, way back, I haven't seen this movie, but after just Googling like Jeff Bridges Bannister or Big Lebowski Bannister, like trying to find some connection. The only thing I could find was this old movie from the 70s called, I think, The Yin and Yang of Mr. No, or Mr. Go. The Yin and Yang of Mr. Go. And if you look up like Jeff Bridges' IMDb page, it's on there. And it's not even a solid connection because it's not like his character. His character is, well, I forget what his character's name is, but there's another character in that movie named Bannister. And I really don't think that's the reference being made in this issue of Wolverine. But I will say again, thanks to Benjamin Percy for, making me think there's a connection to the point where now I want to go see this old movie. So I will probably find a digital copy of that on Vudu or something to watch, because I'm just curious about, an old Jeff Bridges. Like, the plot of it is basically the Buddha. The Buddha is able to, turn people who are villains into heroes and vice versa. So I want to see what that's all about, because what I gather is it seems like Jeff Bridges is a villain, and they're going to, they flip him in the Buddha flips him in a movie to the hero. So I don't know. I got to see it. There's a character named Bannister, loose connection, I know. But anyway, in this issue of Wolverine, he's investigating a drug smuggling operation, which is, at this point, I think this is becoming a bit of a trope. Certainly in the Dawn of X era of X-Men, we're dealing with a lot of the mutants of Krakoa have invented these life-saving cures, these medical cures that can help people all around the world. And they're saying, we'll give them to you, but you got to recognize our autonomy as a nation. You got to recognize the mutant nation of Krakoa. But there's been all these plot points, both in this issue of Wolverine, as well as this has been a lot of the Marauders title so far, that there is a lot of piracy and backstabbing and manipulation and, again, black market dealings for these life-saving drugs. They're being stolen by the Russians. It's got to be the Russians, as well as some other human nations and some just independently operating dealers, operating out of the very fictional nations of Sokovia, Madripoor, all the other famous Marvel locations. And the plot in this issue of Wolverine has to do with, okay, so there's some black market operations for these drugs. They're being stolen. So Catherine Pryde, during the whiskey meetup with Wolverine, is saying, you got to help get these drugs back. Or you got to find out what's going on here. We got to get them to the people that need them and not the people who are just willing to pay the most for them, I think is the argument being made. So Wolverine takes out his SWAT team, essentially, X-Force, which, that's been the case for, it wasn't the original 90s version of X-Force, but that's been the case with these characters for a decade plus now, is that they're essentially Wolverine's Black Ops team. And that continues in this volume. So it's appropriate, Benjamin Percy is writing this because he also writes X-Force. So there's a clear connection there in terms of the characters used. But it almost makes me ask. I think there is a fair justification for this being a Wolverine solo title, but at least with the first story in this issue, it seems like this would have fit just as well as a X-Force issue. And it would have been amazing, to just bring on Adam Kubert as an X-Men or X-Force fill-in artist for a couple of issues to do this Wolverine-centric story. But I also get, marketing-wise, publishing-wise, I totally understand why you would make it a Wolverine solo title, especially if you've got, again, I'll say it, the best Wolverine artist. You want to give him another Wolverine #1. And I think it's funny, he's probably one of the few people that did not, before this, have a Wolverine #1 to his name, because it seems like throughout the 2000s they were restarting it for every other artist. But he had to come in at issue 75 and be happy with that anniversary issue and issue 100. But, maybe that was enough. But still, the sales on any #1 issue, I think we all know, tend to be a bit higher. There's always an attrition. And that's also the temptation for why publishers like Marvel and DC will reboot it #1, because even though it's artificial numbers, it's people buying it for speculative reasons, and they're not going to keep up with the title. You can't argue. I mean, it's a sale, and all sales are final. That's the direct market, so it makes sense that they would do that. And I mentioned this is the first, actually, of 2 stories. So if you only take the first story in this double-page premiere issue that costs $7.99, fair warning, only $7.99, but it's 2 full-size issues in one, which is nice, very nice. And the first one's drawn by Adam Kubert, got a lot of X-Force-centric stuff in it. Some great portrayals, not just of Wolverine, but also Adam Kubert draws a killer Jean Grey as Marvel Girl in that 60s Neil Adam costume that she's wearing right now in Dawn of X. So that's awesome work. But then the backup story, I was actually thrown off for a second. I thought this was, okay, I didn't actually think this was Greg Capullo, but I thought that this artist, Victor Bogdanovic, I might be saying that right. I might not. He is previously known for doing work at DC. He had drawn like some issues of Action Comics, and people have been pointing out online, I just noticed this today, looking him up, that people are saying like, oh man, you draw a lot like Greg Capullo. And I actually was thinking, like while I'm reading the book, I'm thinking, wait a second, I thought this was like Greg Capullo's inker, like Danny Mickey or Jonathan Glapion. I thought he had worked with Greg Capullo, but apparently not. He's just like do a side-by-side comparison. Hold up a Batman comic to this Wolverine comic, a Batman comic drawn by Greg Capullo, of course. And I think you'll see the similarity. And, Greg Capullo is a bit of a prince about it because people ask him like, hey, I don't think, it was like a subtweet. They weren't naming Victor, but they're like, hey, what do you think about people who are drawing things and it's pretty much your style? And, Greg's just like, well, that's great. I'm sure over time they'll start to develop more of their own voice. But at this point, I'll just say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, which I will point out if Jim Lee, you're watching this video, keep that in mind. My imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, LOL. But it's really nice of him to say that. And with Victor, he's a great storyteller, clearly some Greg Capullo influence. And Greg Capullo's always been, even more than his figure work, which is great, he's known for following all the rules you need to in terms of anatomy, perspective, how to make a character, how to make multiple characters exist on the same picture plane appropriately. All those rules. He's good at that. He did like a how-to column for Wizard magazine decades ago about how to draw. And whatever he didn't know already, he worked with McFarlane for probably close to a decade, if not more, on Spawn. So Greg really knows what he's doing. And Victor, I think, is from the same school of thought. He knows what he's doing, and he's doing good work, great work, I'll say, in this backup story for Wolverine #1. The only unfortunate thing is, honestly, you're in the same issue as Adam Kubert, so there's going to be some comparisons made. And if I keep saying that Adam is the best, then I have to say, well, Victor, as good as you are, you could only be second best. But that's still pretty good. And he does great work. And, story-wise, I might actually say they're both written by Benjamin Percy. I give the nod to this second story. I think the second story in this issue of Wolverine is my favorite of the two, just in terms of the plot and the story and the characters involved. Although I love Adam Kubert's art, I really, really liked basically it's vampires. It's a vampire story in the backup here. You got Omega Red returning, which I haven't read a lot of Omega Red comics. I don't know a lot about the character. I've read the original stuff from, the original X-Men series from the 90s. Like issue 4, I think, was when he originally appeared. Although the crazy thing about that is that there was foreshadowing for Omega Red in the title in issues like 2 or 3. And that was when Chris Claremont was still writing, and those were his last issues. So I really wonder how much of that was him, or was he already out the door and this was like Bob Harris, John Byrne, Jim Lee story seeding for Omega Red for the next arc. But if it was, even a little bit Claremont, I always wonder what would he have done with the character. But Omega Red in this issue of Wolverine is, it starts with him coming to Krakoa for asylum. He's looking for, all mutants are welcome. All mutants can set up shop on the island. But to an extent, Omega Red is a type of vampire. He's got to drink blood and kill to survive, I think. That's what they say in this issue. So I'm going to take it as true. And so Wolverine's like, no, we can't let him around all these kids because he'll eat the kids and drink their blood. I'm like, Wolverine's got a good point. Maybe we shouldn't let him in. Maybe we should just trap him in the center of the island like we did Sabretooth. But Magneto's like, no, Wolverine, he just came through this portal. I want you to go back through the portal and find out what was like such a mess over there that Omega Red ran over here to get help from us. Because he shows up all battered and bruised, covered in a lot of his own blood. And so he goes out, and it turns out the other side of the portal is Franch, and who's been living, Franch, in France. Who's been living in the catacombs in France? You guessed it, vampires. And who should make an appearance? I told you there'd be spoilers. Here they are. Of course, Dracula shows up. And every time Dracula shows up in the Marvel Universe, it always throws me for a loop because I forget he's basically a recurring character. And I think there's been like a couple times. You know, Blade, the vampire killer, is also a Marvel character. And I think there's been at least one time, maybe 2 or 3, where Blade is outright just staked Dracula, killed him. But he keeps coming back. But remember, kids, Dracula's in the public domain, so anyone can make a Dracula comic. And again, I said there's history with Dracula and the X-Men, because at one point he turned Storm, and there have been like alternate universe versions of Storm where it's like, oh, she stayed a vampire and she became Bloodstorm. Now that is an edgy code name. So, you know, even going back to like somewhere in the 140s, 150s of Uncanny X-Men, back when Claremont was writing in the 80s, maybe even late 70s, Dracula showed up, bit Storm. I think they fixed her. I know they fixed her. They helped her out. But they've dealt with Dracula before. But Wolverine doesn't actually run into Dracula in this issue. But for whatever reason, Dracula wants Wolverine's blood. I guess it's like it's the finest. It's like, you know, a nice 18th century Bordeaux. Not that I'm a connoisseur or anything. But it's funny that like Dracula really wants Wolverine's blood. And then I guess the plot point for it is that now he can stand the sunlight. Like Wolverine's blood. He gets Wolverine's blood. He has like a bunch of vampires and bats attack Wolverine in the catacombs. And he gets the blood. And then now like the cliffhanger is that Dracula can stand in the sunlight. And Omega Red, who was working with Dracula the whole time, dun dun dun, is like, well, unless you got SPF 3000, I'm pretty sure that you have got Wolverine's blood. And Dracula's like, yes, now go back undercover and pretend to be friends with the X-Men. And then later we will drink all their blood, I guess, is where we're going with this. But I don't think we'll be going with it anytime soon. It's going to be like one of those suspended plot points where it is going to come up in a much later issue, because just looking at solicitations for the 2nd and 3rd issue of Wolverine, it looks like it's not going to be issue 2 or 3 where we get this follow-up to the Dracula story. We're going to be focusing on the main story, following up to that with more Adam Kubert art and more of like X-Force investigating who is stealing all of our drugs. Stop stealing our drugs. And also running into Agent the Big Lebowski. What's his actual name? Agent Bannister. And there is also a cliffhanger in the main story. We know it's not going to be anything too serious, but there is... it looks like Wolverine killed everybody again. Looks like he killed X-Force. They're out in the snow, and somehow Wolverine just... You know, he went into a berserker rage and just killed everyone, woke up, and was like, gosh, I feel guilty about this. But you know what? Maybe it wasn't his fault. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say it wasn't his fault, and we'll find out why in the coming issues. But I am curious mostly about what is going to be the vampire connection. So that's what I'm looking forward to. And as long as they can keep Adam on the art, I will be definitely looking forward to that. If they had to bring in fill-in artist, I've got some suggestions. I always do. Some of my other favorites, this is like a pipe dream, but after Jim Lee and Adam Kubert, I really, really liked Mark Silvestri's run on the title. And a lot of people think of it as like character-defining work on the Wolverine title. And that was like issues, the first volume, like 31 to 57. And with that, if they could get Silvestri to come back and do Wolverine, that would be amazing. I would be down for that. I don't think it'll happen, so that's a pipe dream. Other than that, if they bring back Tex, that would be awesome to see more work from him. Steve Scroce, I think, or Scroce? He did a nice run called Blood Debt, Volume 1, 150 to 153. If he came back and did more Wolverine, that would be killer. Ian Churchill did a couple issues in there. If he came back, that would be sick. Lionel Francis Yu already drawing X-Men right now, but if he wants to do Wolverine, I'm down for that too. But again, I don't want to make it sound like, Adam, I'm done with you. Who's next? Because I'm not. I want more Adam art as much as they're going to allow me. Now, also, I didn't finish up the conversation, so I want to mention this now. In terms of how they keep renumbering old Wolverines, they keep going back and starting at 1. We got up to issue 300. So they combined Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, and the Weapon X series. Got to 300, then ran to 17 issues of that. So 317. And then, again, for whatever reason, they already did an anniversary 900. The next one they do is they jump to 1,000. They do Wolverine 1,000. We're never going to get there at this rate if they keep restarting. We'll never get there, honestly, anyway. But they did a Wolverine 1,000. Then they did Volume 4 for 13 issues. And then restarted that at number 1 the very next year for 12 issues. And then I think they killed Wolverine and replaced him with his clone daughter. Is that the story? X-23. You know, she was in the Logan movie. And she was Wolverine for a bit, but I don't think we're counting that as an official Wolverine volume for the same reason that Wolverine's son, he's got a lot of illegitimate children, one way or the other. Wolverine's son, Daken, I'm not sure which way you say it, was Wolverine in the Dark Wolverine series, which was actually just an extension of Volume 2. Yeah, Volume 2 that ran from issue 75. It changed after 74 from Wolverine to Dark Wolverine, and then ran like 15 or 16 issues from 75 to 90, I believe. But we're not going to count the heirs of Wolverine as having their own proper Logan-centric Wolverine titles. I think just in terms of fairness here. But it's funny that they, did kill Wolverine because, as I understand it, before Claremont left the title in the early 90s, this was one of the things he really wanted to do. He was like, we got to kill Wolverine. And at the time, there was no way Marvel and the editor-in-chief, Bob Harris, and whoever else was in charge at the time, was going to do this. They were just not going to knock off their most popular X-Men character, who at the time, I think, was the only X-Men character to have a solo title. And so they just weren't going to get rid of this popular character. But Claremont wanted to kill Wolverine, at least for a little bit, and he eventually got his way when he did the X-Men Forever regular series that eventually became a limited series. It didn't run on too long. So X-Men Forever was a series in the 2000s after Chris Claremont came back to Marvel. It was like, what if Claremont never left the X-Men? That was like the sales pitch for it. So it picked up right where X-Men number 3 leaves off, and Wolverine dies almost instantly in X-Men Forever. And then going to visit his grave, I think, for whatever reason, like Kate Pryde, again, one of his former child sidekicks, gets fused with one of the claws from Wolverine's skeleton. Like his dead skeleton, like there's some weird sort of phasing mishap, and she gets one of the claws like stuck in her hand. So now she has one or two Wolverine, I think it was one Wolverine claw. And that was like going to be how they remembered the character. And I forget if Wolverine actually came back in X-Men Forever or if he just stayed dead for the whole time. But Claremont did a lot of off-the-wall stuff in there that was like, it would have been amazing if they had just done it in the mainstream. But I think at that time in the early 90s, like Marvel was really, really veering away from, having a lot of radical changes from the characters because they wanted some consistency in terms of how the characters would be portrayed in multimedia. Because they had done things like they made a pilot for, if you ever saw the pilot, Pride of the X-Men. Like that, by the time it came out, it was already sort of an old version of the team. That like those characters were no longer there. Like Dazzler was not a regular character on the team. And that was even more noticeable when they used that TV show as like the basis for the arcade game. And Dazzler's in there. It's like 1993 or something. And at that point, I may be the only Dazzler fan left on the planet. Everyone else is just asking, who is this character? And why isn't, who would have been a bit like, why isn't like Jean Grey or Phoenix there instead? I think they had Storm there, so I won't say that one. That was a good choice. So I think, in terms of the other crazy things in X-Men Forever, like he was doing stuff like giving Rogue Nightcrawler's powers and basically turning her into like a blue long-tailed devil sort of character. And like starting a romance. This was the craziest part to me. There was a romance between like Hank McCoy, the Beast, and Jean Grey after like Wolverine died, and she admitted that Wolverine was her true love, and like it broke Cyclops' heart. Meanwhile, in what actually happened world, 616 Marvel, the main continuity, like 27 issues after Claremont's gone, Jean Grey and Cyclops get married. But, you know, again, go forward 10 years after that, and Grant Morrison's written it so that now Cyclops is having mental cheats on Jean Grey with the White Queen, and it really causes Jean to phoenix out, so to speak. So it's not like Marvel is unwilling to try these radical things, but at the time they apparently just were not willing to give that chance to Claremont. All right, so I've talked a lot about, you know, what was going on in this new issue of Wolverine, what I'm looking forward to, some of the history of the character, and you know, how he's been portrayed even in multimedia and some of the casting decisions. And what I'm going to do is I'm getting close to wrapping up drawing this part of the head sketch. So anyone that's watching, if you got any other questions or comments in the chat and you want to get in there before I get out of here, that'd be great. I'd be willing to stick around and answer some stuff. But if I'm reaching the natural end of this, I'm reaching the natural end of it. That is just how it goes. But let me know if there's anything else on your mind. You want to talk about Wolverine, comics in general. If not, or if you just want to table it till later, I will hopefully be back, do my best to be back this Saturday evening for more live drawing and talking about, not sure entirely what yet, but either leave a comment below or in the chat if there's something you'd like to see me tackle, either art-wise or discussion-wise. I'd be happy to either way. And also, I will say, in general, you know, we reached that point where I start my sales pitch, where I say, hey, did you like what you saw today? Did you enjoy the program? Do you like my YouTube channel? Are you liking this fun little, am I getting this on the right side? This fun little watermark that I've plugged in over here? You can tap that to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Further than that, if you want to get notifications every time I go live or just post a video, feel free. Feel free to tap the bell for notifications. If you like this video specifically, hey, why not smash that like button? It's what you do. That's YouTube culture, people. And besides that, I really appreciate everyone that tunes in, either live or, you know, if you tune in a little later on and just watch the video after it's been posted. I appreciate all the views. I appreciate all the feedback. It is overwhelmingly positive, and that is just, it's fantastic. I really don't deserve it, but it's still nice to hear. Who am I to turn down a compliment? But we're getting very close here to finishing up. I'm gonna get some more of these striations down in black, and then ultimately call it. Oh, one of the other lines, I made a note of this that I really liked from this issue. Keep your claws popped and your friends close. I think that is something that Jean Grey says to Wolverine at one point in this issue. And I just thought, well, that is humorous. All right. You know, some people call me out for like, it's weird that you put down the colors, you put down the Copic markers before you put down the black line. And I'm like, yes, it is weird. It is the strangest thing I do. But sometimes it just seems natural to me. Oh, I'm glad that I'm still alive so I can mention this, because it just occurred to me again. So in this issue of Wolverine, he's talking about, or there's the text page where they say Wolverine his blood has restorative properties, but his body's like a vault for the blood. Essentially, like once the blood leaves his body, like it doesn't hold those restorative properties. It doesn't like just take the healing factor to whoever ingests it. So they said that in the same issue, literally, that Dracula's like, oh, I got Wolverine's blood. I'm so powerful now. And I'm like, well, which is it, guys? Is it a vault or can you transfer it? Maybe it's different for vampires, but still, it's like extra confusing to me when you make that point in the same issue that you sort of contradict the point. I don't know. Is it a red herring? Is it a hemoglobin herring? I don't know. All right, I am liking this. I am happy with where this went today. This was fun. It's always fun and always, I would say, cathartic more than anything. to talk through art practice. So get some of these blacks in here. Start to firm up the character a bit. This is how you take a 6.5 out of 10 quality drawing and turn it into a 6.6. Yeah. All right, so that is going to be my stopping point today. Again, thanks for everyone that joined in. Thanks for everyone that watched. And, you know, if you're an artist yourself, post some of your stuff below. I'll be happy to check it out. And otherwise, you know, all the artists out there, keep drawing. Everyone else, I will see you next time, next stream, probably on Saturday. So have a good one, and goodbye.